Thank you, choir. So I realized this morning that the title of my sermon, For the Goddess of Love, might appear as if we were becoming a pagan church. But really it comes out of Rabindranath Tagore's poem that Ellen read. Just a historical note. Tagore came to America in the early part of the 20th century and spoke in Dallas at our church. Legend has it that 500 to 1,000 people showed up to hear him read his poetry. Those were days when poets could command an audience. But his poem, For the Goddess of Love, he's speaking about a temple that has been abandoned. In a sense, he's asking us, what have we done with love? What have we done with love? And so on the Sunday before Valentine's Day, when we will be asked to reflect on love, I thought it important to speak on love, although some would say every Sunday we speak on love. Today I want to speak particularly about one aspect of love. And I want to start with 3 stories. The first story is about a man in his early 40s who is dying of AIDS. When he gets to the hospital, pretty weak, almost not able to go in, his doctor there tells him he's got about 6 months to live. His family has abandoned him, and his lover left when it got too hard. To leave the hospital, he needed friends, and so 3 friends came and took him to their home. And they cleared out a bedroom and set him up and signed up with each other to make a rotation, leaving one day of work each week to be with their friend, to read to him, and to cook for him. And of course, any person who is going through something like that was cranky, wept with the pain, and screamed at his friends for being able to leave when he was stuck inside. But when they buried him, they each spoke of how they loved this young man, how much he had brought to their lives in that 6-month period. The second story is about a granddaughter who's living with her grandmother. She's a troubled teenager, and that's probably why she's living with her grandmother. She's the kind of kid who puts her foot in her mouth occasionally. When her aunt said something about her nose ring, she said old people with warts on their noses shouldn't speak of beautiful noses with rings. She's the kind of kid who gets in trouble and needs connections at the sheriff's office and at doctor's offices. And every night when her grandmother's preparing to get into bed, this young girl comes and climbs in next to her grandmother to warm her feet and her hands. And her grandmother tells her stories about when she was a young girl, the kind of girl who got in trouble and needed connections at the sheriff's office and doctor's offices. And in some sense, they feel as if they are one, although they know that this precious moment is fleeting and the next day will bring other wars to wage. The third story is about a couple. They've been married a long time and they are beginning to look a lot like each other. You know that happens? At least they smile the same way. It's as if they have studied each other in admiration, picked up each other's qualities. Except when they started to renovate their house. They started building onto the back, and they became like contractors with lawyers in the wings, each their own idea of what should happen. The neighbors said they were thankful the project only lasted 8 months because they thought the Hatfields and the McCoys had moved in. When the project was done, one night, just as the stain was drying on the back porch, the man went out in the middle of the night in the full moon, pulled on his coat because it was cold like it was last night, and looked up at the project with a kind of sad satisfaction. Sad that they had been through so many fights along the way, but satisfied that it was over. It wasn't perfect, but it was okay. And his wife came out with a hot cup of coffee, the way he likes it in the middle of the night, and gave it to him and put her arm around them, and they looked up together at their project. And they stood in silence looking at their home, feeling a calm respect for the other that transcended their differences. It came through the soul, a kind of silence they enjoyed before and now again with the project over. Now, what do those three stories have to do with each other? Again, that's not a rhetorical question. I'm asking you. I said to the last service, you're going to have to get used to this. I don't want you to preach the sermon, but I want you to think and give me some response. What are those about? Love, yes, acceptance. What's that? Love when it's hard. Now, those stories all come out of my life. They are stories of people I've known, friends, and people I've ministered to. They are about frail and complicated and average people who are going about their lives the best they could, like you and I. And I knew all the people in those stories, but I've also seen those stories repeated over and over again. Those stories could also be about us. The theme in those stories is that even in the midst of their love, there's conflict and pain, two things that we all know about. No doubt our lives have enough of those. But there's also a kind of love I want to talk about in those stories. We could call it unconditional love. Unconditional love is when you love someone the way he or she is, rather than the way you want him or her to be. Raise your hand if you've ever loved someone and wanted them to be different. Come on, I know everybody's out there. Unconditional love may be the only kind of love that really fills us up, because we love without expecting anything in return, without trying to change another person's behavior or personality. This is a kind of love that lives outside of the way we conduct our business every day, the kind of contracts or deals we make with each other and our children may have a piece of this. But when we go to that transactional quality, we lose sight of it. Theologically speaking, the theologian Karl Barth spoke of unconditional love as God's love for humanity, as the highest model of this idea. God's love is proved for Barth in the Hebrew Scriptures and the covenants that God made with the people of Israel. Those covenants said, I love you not if you succeed or fail, but rather I will love you because you will fail, and we will begin again. God and Israel didn't have a binding contract with clauses and penalties, except some of the stories actually do speak of that. But the overarching idea is that to love the person, not the behavior, and to constantly reset the love over and over again is the task. Unconditional love is covenantal, in other words. It comes with expectations. It comes with even some requirements, but asks that you love your partner and child or friend without too many penalties when they let you down, and that you get past the behavior to the person. And that distinguishing between the two is the trick. Now, I know in your mind you're formulating all kinds of reasons why I am wrong right now. And that's because it's incredibly challenging to even glimmer that kind of love. It may be impossible for us frail and complicated and average people. The friend or the partner who forgets the one ingredient that you need for the dinner party when you wrote it down, took a picture of it, and put it on their forehead can be hard to love in that moment when you're standing in the kitchen empty-handed. But despite the letdown, the person remains there in front of you. Temporarily unlovable, perhaps, but ultimately, if you believe it, the one you must love. Now, sure, this is easier in the case of minor misdemeanors rather than serious transgressions or more severe letdowns. I would never suggest that you live or love through unbearable, violent, or abusive transgressions. Certainly, to love a partner who forgets to put the coffee pot on in the morning is easier than to love the Hottentot who burns your village. But how do you get to a life of love without conditions, or even a glimmer of that? The good news is that religions have tried to help us with this. Maybe one essential way in which religion has tried to reset humanity's destructive inclinations is to lift up models of love that we might follow. Christianity promotes the message, love thy neighbor and turn the other cheek, which I'm sure we all try to subscribe to, until the neighbor sues us for having the fence 4 inches too close to him, or comes over and steals our cow. But remember, Jesus' message of love was an attempt to make an improvement on the law of eye for an eye, which was not a metaphor. In ancient times, someone who stabbed you in the eye, the court ordered for the stabber's eye to be cut out. That was barbaric. Turn the other cheek, I'm convinced, was an attempt to try to help us, frail and complicated and average people, land somewhere between that ideal and the notion of an eye for an eye is how we interact with each other. The message that comes through to me is that the goal of living with a kinder and gentler heart is the spiritual goal. Even when we dislike the action, we attempt to love the person. Is this a spiritual matter for you? That was a rhetorical question, so don't answer it. Does it challenge your sense of what love is? On Valentine's Day, when we are saturated with notions of romantic love, we might think of this quote from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who said, "Life has taught us that love does not consist in gazing in each other's eyes, but in looking outward together in the same direction." I think we have bought into romantic love so firmly that we soil it with fantasy. Perhaps the love in the stories I told that comes more from a deep, soulful exchange rather than candlelight gazing into one another's eyes is the love we should be looking for. Maybe it comes in serious and important forms to remind us that a deeper love resides beyond our attempts to change another, to change them and put contracts on how we interact. So I want to make a little leap here now to that poem that Aaron read. The Mormon missionaries are coming down the road. We see them coming a mile away, and the man in the lawn chair, like a wall, I think the poet wants us to take the cigar-smoking man's side here. He sits there, and here come the missionaries. And I think the question that comes out of the poem is, what do you do with people who want you to be other than who you are? In other words, not applying that unconditional love idea. These elders aren't coming to join him in his cigar-smoking, bird-watching, sunset-appreciating worship. They are coming to change his mind and heart and get him to their house of worship. In a way, the poet is saying these missionaries have no love in their hearts in some way. They don't want the man to stay who he is. They want to change him. But like we human beings who live in the world, the man in the poem has already taken a risk and stepped out beyond even his porch, out onto his lawn and into public. He is sitting outside his house. He has gone already to a place where he is inviting others to interfere with his worship, even though he meets this interruption with disdain. Who has the blind spot in this poem? I'm guessing we are siding right now with the man. And this could become a sermon about missionaries and how annoying they are, but it's not. Does the man have a blind spot, I ask you? Is his heart so unloving as to not find a way even to embrace these elders for who they are? I'm intrigued how this poem, not simply a Valentine's poem on love, raises the spiritual question, what do you do with people who want to change you? But it quickly challenges back, what walls do we put up that harden our heart's response to others? Love resides unbidden in the temple of Tagore's poem because we average, frail, complicated human beings put walls up around our hearts and define love as transactional more than unconditional. The spiritual question today is that in a world saturated with romantic notions of love, can we, frail, complicated, average human beings, do in our lives what might make more unconditional activities come to life? What conditions have we created around the loves that we give and receive that need review? What stories in our lives need to be rewritten? Because in the end, the wisdom of the ages asks us, what are we living for if not the release of our own captive hearts from the bonds of our world's conditions? In the end, aren't the riches in our lives the ones we deposit in the First National Bank of Soul? Aren't we to live lives that end without regrets over things we could have controlled? So from one frail, complicated, average person to another, I know love is not easy, but we have glimmers of the kind of love that we can make offerings to. It is up to us not only to visit that temple from time to time, but in the end, to reside there. A good Valentine's Day to you, my friends. Amen.